Okay, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, and thank you for your interest and your attendance in this webinar. I would like to start our program tonight by acknowledging the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional custodians of the lands on which we live and work today. I would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. My name is Brahmaputra Marjadi, or Bram for short. I'm your host in this event tonight. I'm from Indonesia and has been living in Sydney for 15 years and counting. I'm the Associate Dean for Engagement at the Western Sydney University School of Medicine, and I'm also an advisor at the Cultural Diversity Network Incorporated, or CDNI. I would like now to invite Linda Sun, the Vice President of CDNI, to deliver her welcome address. Linda, over to you. You're still muted, Linda.
Thanks, Bram. Good evening all, and thank you for joining our webinar, which I hope you'll find insightful and interesting. As Bram mentioned, my name is Linda, and I am the current Vice President of Cultural Diversity Network, a not-for-profit organisation, which I co-founded with Sabrin, Nagendra, Sadia and Wayne in February of this year. We're an organisation that are for migrants and refugees, led by migrants and refugees. We are for inclusion and belonging. We strongly believe that every migrant and refugee that comes to Australia has a wonderful contribution to make as themselves, as who they are with all they know and the experiences they bring. This includes LGBTQIA plus refugees who have faced and continue to face multiple intersecting challenges and traumas, as you'll get to hear about very shortly. This is the first webinar in a series of 3, focusing on pre-flight experiences of LGBTQIA plus refugees. Our second webinar will focus on in-flight challenges, whilst the third on post-settlement experiences. I do hope that you can join us for those sessions as well. Please keep a lookout under the events section of our website, cdni.org.au. Enjoy the evening, and back over to you, Bram.
Okay, thank you, Linda. I noticed that there are some people who probably would like to be admitted to the room now. We're supposed to have 31 participants all up, Linda, if you could probably admit everybody.
Okay. Yep.
Couple of minutes for everybody to come in. Okay, so that's 25. Yep, great. Okay, so thank you, Linda, again for your welcome address. And just for everybody who just joined, welcome to this webinar. Just a bit of housekeeping. Tonight we have 3 fantastic speakers who will each speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. During their presentations and the question and answer, you can submit any question you may have using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Linda will collate the questions and I will do the same, and we'll post them to the speakers after the presentations. We plan to have about 20 minutes of question and answer time at the end of the presentations. Now, I acknowledge that some people may not wish to reveal their gender, sexuality, ethnicity, residency status, or other identities, and that is absolutely fine. Consequently, I would really appreciate if you do not reveal anybody else's identity in your questions. Please note that we have centrally muted all participants to avoid accidental background noises. Yeah, just to make sure that everything is recorded well. And lastly, before I introduce the speakers for tonight, trigger warning for everybody. During this webinar, we will have sharing and discussion of experiences which you may find confronting. Please feel free to disconnect from the webinar if you feel overwhelmed, and immediately contact the nearest support service, such as Lifeline 13 11 14. Now, I'm delighted to introduce you to our speakers. I'm going to introduce all of them now before they start sharing the materials. The first speaker is Professor Jaya Dantas, who is the Dean International in the Faculty of Health Sciences and Professor in the School of Public Health at Curtin University in Western Australia. Dr. Dantas has worked for 34 years in India, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Timor-Leste, and Australia, and has undertaken consultancies in Pakistan, Kosovo, Sri Lanka, Singapore, and South Africa. Since the year 2000, she has undertaken research projects in Rwanda, Australia, India, Timor-Leste, Sri Lanka, and Uganda with a focus on refugee and migrant populations. Her teaching, research, and advocacy are based on human rights, resilience, social determinants, and health inequalities. Our second speaker is Bijan Karduni, who was born in Iran on 28th of April 1984. He earned his bachelor's degree in English language and literature and a master's degree in British studies in Iran. He is a current PhD student at Western Sydney University, having started in October 2017 in social sciences. Specifically, Bijan is researching homophobia in the Iranian society. After the establishment of the Islamic Revolution in 1979 in Iran, the execution of gay men has become one of the practices by the regime in order to establish Sharia law in the society. As an Iranian gay man, Bijan had first-hand experiences of daily life in general and gay life in Iran from the day he was born to the day he came to Australia. The cruelty and discrimination towards homosexuals in Iran were the main reasons for him to become a refugee in Australia. Bijan considered himself as a gay man who has always tried to build a better place for himself and the community. Our third speaker is Heather Grace Jones, has been working in community and international development for the past 2 decades. Grace has worked in Australia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Indonesia, and has experience in supporting civil society with a focus on gender mainstreaming, media development, training and education, and raising awareness across a range of issues, including the elimination of violence against women. She has worked at the Service for the Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture and Trauma Survivors, or STARTS, for 4 years, initially as part of the Families in Cultural Transition team. She currently works alongside people from refugee backgrounds with diverse genders and sexualities, and is among the first LGBTQIA+ project workers in the torture and trauma service worldwide. She is the co-editor of 2 books. So as you can see, everybody, we have brilliant presenters tonight. So without further ado, I would like to invite Jaya now to share your presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Bram. I will share my screen. I have a few slides, and I will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes, giving a perspective of the country that I was born and I come from. I was born in India, and I'll give a perspective about India. Then I lived in Africa, and I'll give a small perspective about Uganda, and then the global context and the UNHCR context, and end there. So I'll just share my screen. Are you able to see the screen?
Yep.
Okay. So I just want to briefly talk about where it all began for me. I grew up in Mumbai, which is a big mega city in India, completed my master's degree and taught at a women's university. But in India, a very visible population is the Hijra community, or the transgender community, which faces significant discrimination. And this is a visible community because you see them on the streets, you see them as people who cross-dress, but who consider themselves women, but are termed within India as Hijras. I taught at a women's university and then left in 1990 for Africa. It was my first exposure at that time to be identified as a person of color. And I think in the last few months, with the Black Lives Movement, this has come to the fore about rights of people of color. It was also a time in Africa where there was a lot of massive change. So I had come from a mega city that never slept, to police with batons, to suddenly the military on the street, gunfire at nights. But one of the things that I faced there was the reality of the HIV pandemic. So we are facing the COVID-19 pandemic here now globally, but 30 years ago when I was in Africa, it was the HIV/AIDS pandemic. And here there was this dynamics of homosexuality and heterosexuality within the pandemic that was evolving, but also to other issues of malaria and Ebola. But one of the things that was there very evident in these countries was the refugee and migrant movements across most parts of Africa, but very much so in Sudan, in Angola, in parts of Central and Sub-Saharan Africa. I was in Uganda when, for 4 years, I lived there, and at the height of the HIV pandemic, where there were 3 world events. One was the HIV pandemic, second was the genocide in Rwanda and the mass movements of people, and the end of apartheid in South Africa. And it was these issues that have made me passionate about refugee and migrant issues in all forms. Refugee and migrants who are women at risk, refugee and migrants of people who have gender non-conformity. And I will now tell you why this is an issue. As of today, 72 countries in the world criminalize private consensual sexual activity between adults of the same sex. All of these countries criminalize men, but 44 countries also criminalize women. So this is a serious issue because the gay sex or sex between same-sex couples is considered a criminal activity in these countries. So here you can see a map of the world and these countries, and a significant proportion of them are in certain parts of Africa and in the MENA region, the Middle East and Arab region, some parts of the Asia Pacific region, and 11 countries out of the 72 countries impose the death penalty. So people of same-sex intimacy can actually die. And in some countries, or where the death penalty is imposed, it's harsh death penalty. You can be stoned to death in these countries. So this is the reality of the situation today in 2021. In spite of all the laws in many of the countries, in spite of awareness, we have world leaders who are of same sex and openly gay. We had till recently the half Indian, half Irish Prime Minister of Ireland, Leo Varadkar, was openly gay. We have the current Prime Minister, President of Serbia. We have of Liechtenstein. So there are openly gay leaders in the world today, yet we have countries that do not allow or do not accept same-sex relationships. I would like to talk about India here. In the country of my birth, it has a long history of transgender populations. And now, since 2014, they have been recognized in the census as the third gender. So there is this, and it has been mentioned before, more than 4,000 years ago in Hindu scriptures, in medieval India. But the criminalization started during British colonial rule, where they were called criminals, addicts committing serious crimes. They were arrested for transgender people who dressed in women's clothing or playing music or in indulging in gay sex. So that started in 1871 in India. After independence, we had independence in 1947. They still remain socially excluded and ostracized. And many of them, because India is not a social security country, they actually beg, or it leads to prostitution. And they got legal status, as I said, in 2014. And in 2018, the Supreme Court of India made a ruling to recognize gay sex. So India is moving in the right direction, but still it's not openly accepted, and it's more difficult for lesbian women because often then there is a corrective strategy. Oh, we will normalize you, we'll make you married, or some of them are forced into relationships that are not of their making. So these things still go on in India. Now coming to Uganda, And this is as recent as 2019, where there's a whole division with a large amount of the population, large proportion of the population, where LGBTIQ activists can be murdered. There's call to change laws, and very vocal and open calls to change laws in the country. They use religion, they say it's not cultural, and basically they want nothing to do with homosexuality. So here we have a minister, at the Ethics and Integrity Minister, actually wanting to introduce a bill for the so-called promotion and recruitment by gay people that would include the death penalty. And this was in 2019. So he claims that it's not natural to Ugandans, but he feels that there's a recruitment by gay people in schools with the falsehood that they're born like that. So this makes it really hard in countries like that. So these are just two countries which are going different ways. In India, there's a huge activist movement. So you need that activist movement from within the population itself, and that has happened in India. So you had very prominent gay activists, and Wendell Rodrigues, one of the Indian fashion designers, who was openly gay, and he was a real activist. He passed away just recently, a few months ago. The Human Dignity Trust, since 2011, so not very long, just about 10 years old. It has worked with activists and lawyers in 18 different countries to challenge laws that discriminate on the basis of sexual identity or orientation. But predominantly they work, as you can see, in Africa, Asia, Europe, Americas, and the Pacific. And they have cases. They use the Constitution, they use legal rights to lobby for people of sexual orientation or gender identity. Now, coming to the UN, asylum seekers and refugees with diverse sexual orientation or gender identity face extreme vulnerabilities, severe discrimination and violence in their countries of origin, sexual abuse. And I think one of the most difficult parts in countries where it's criminalized, or even where it might be accepted, there can be no protection from the police. There's discrimination, severe discrimination from the police that make it really difficult for them to say that they have been abused. For people of LGBTIQA+ orientation to seek protection. There's often exclusion from basic services, there's detention, social or familial ostracizing and exclusion. And I've heard this, especially in the Indian context, where they have actually come out and said, I'm now gay, and they have wanted to share this with their family, and they've been ostracized. And then the family doesn't speak to them. So some of in the country of asylum, some of the harm may be violence and harassment, insensitive or inappropriate questioning at stages of refugee status determination, intolerance, harassment, and violence by the state and non-state agents, and discrimination and safety threats in accommodation, healthcare, and employment. I mean, in India, they can't be employed, and now there's a movement to actually make it more inclusive for them. And often it's survival sex, enforced displacement, and this is a problem. But this is a problem also for women at risk. And here are just some images from the UNHCR report where people have wanted to actually leave their countries because they feel terribly, terribly persecuted in their own countries, and they feel they won't be able to lead a full and productive life. So some of the things that we really need to work towards, and in countries like ours, like Australia, where we are privileged to be able to practice openly with whatever orientation we may want, how do we go about helping and advocating for decriminalization of consensual same-sex sexual activity, uphold the freedom of association and rights for LGBTIQA+ people, and ensure that there are constitutional protections against discrimination. That is why it's really important that you need those constitutional protections. And it's a huge fight here. and you have to challenge the degrading treatment of people, such as the use of forced medical examinations that can happen that does happen in certain countries. And the insights of some of the UNHCR staff globally reveal that there is no single mitigating factor that keeps LGBTIQ plus people free from persecution and from their ability to exercise their fundamental rights, especially when they are in these countries. And even if they are in countries where there is no apparent form of legal discrimination, or there are laws that do not criminalize LGBTIQ identity, these people may nevertheless be subject to hostility, violence, or discrimination. So I'll stop here, Bram, and over to you, just to give you a global perspective of the issue.
Thank you very much, Jaya. And for all the participants, if you would like to ask questions, you can type in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, okay? I'm going to now invite Bijan to share your story with everybody. Time is yours, Bijan.
Thank you so much, Bram. And thank you so much, Jaya, for your marvelous, awesome presentation, which gave me myself a very good insight of what is happening in India and in Africa in general. So I was, as Bram said, I was born in Iran, and I always lived under the threat and fear of being persecuted and executed, which is a common practice by the Islamic regime in Iran, and they do it in public most of the time, the execution itself. I was living under that fear and threat, but at the same time, because you need to not only survive, you need to live your life in a way, you need to find ways to connect to other people who are similar to you. You need to find sex, you need to find relationship. And those factors helped me to try and to find people like me in Iran, and to kind of take the risk of getting even killed, but to connect to people. And I think that's a factor that sometimes is overlooked. Like, many people are in closet, and they need to be because of their social, political situation. But in a country like Iran, I mean, the term closet can have different meanings. For me, myself, it's like, okay, my parents know, but nobody else in my family know about it. And then my friends, they know, and some of them, they couldn't tolerate the thing. I gave them the option to leave me. But it's not similar to everybody. And that's one of the points that I wanted to mention, that we cannot put refugees in a box. We are different from each other. We have different backgrounds. We have different opinions. We are from different colors of the rainbow. And even our own individual and unique self matters in this regard. I cannot say that I represent refugees in general. It's just that I am one of them. And there are thousands of stories for refugees. And my story is that I took the risk, and maybe another person doesn't want to do that. I took the risk, and I started relationships even when I was in Iran. And it was very hard, the struggles and all of those social factors around me. They were very hard. But at the same time, I didn't want to be a product of social norms, because that's the thing that Islamic regime want to do, to do it through heteronormativity, in a sense that everybody should be the same. I should marry a girl, I should have a family of 2 children, so the reproduction and things like that. So that social norm that you hear every day, and even from your family, from your friends. And for some people, it's very hard to oppose it. For me, it was a privilege that I could find some ways to find my own way. And I think those experiences and struggles and fears helped me to build a kind of resilience. So when I came to Australia, I could use all of those experiences that I had to find my way. And some people think that pre-flight and post-flight, they are kind of disconnected from each other. But according to my own experience, it's not. When I'm talking about here in Australia, there are so many things that I use from my experiences back in Iran. And I really think that they are interconnected. And it can be, some sort of trauma. It can be some sort of fear, anxiety. And then when you are in a new situation, a trigger can remind you all of the things that you previously experienced. And maybe for another person, that trigger wouldn't do much. But I think for a person with that experience, a refugee or a person with trauma, it can trigger something really major. And another thing is, when I came to Australia, I tried to create my own family, but also the fears that I had was my biggest challenge. But again, those fears was in my way, but at the same time, they helped me to be resilient here. And when I applied for protection visa and going through the process of protection visa, from the application day to interview, post-interview, all this time, I was thinking about the experiences that I had in Iran, and it gave me a sense of strength that, okay, you have experienced worse than this, you can manage this one. And by saying that, it doesn't make it less stressful or less fearful. It's just, it was my survival mechanism to do it. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I had, although I studied English before coming to Australia, I started to study English since I was 8. But in an English-speaking country, no matter how much you have studied before, you need to practice English in another way. And sometimes it's lost in translation. And it can cause another anxiety for you. especially for me, I think Australian accent, because Australians talk very fast. So it was hard for me. It took me 6 months or 8 months to kind of find a way to talk and communicate. But whenever I encountered something, like, for example, if somebody talked to me in a very fast way, sometimes, even now, I get the anxiety after 3 years that maybe my English is not good enough. So these challenges that are unique to every person can lead to anxiety, can lead to different complications. But at the same time, I think the resilience that I got and the family that I could create here in Australia as a chosen family, not family by blood, helped me to overcome. Not, I cannot say that I 100% and completely overcome everything, but I could find a way to at least go to the other side. And one of my friends, she's also a refugee, and she's one of my biggest inspiration. She always says that we walk on and we walk strong, no matter how hard our situations are. We walk on and we walk strong. So that's the thing that I wanted to say. And if I can link it to briefly, because I know that it's pre-flight webinar, but I want to link something here. I think strength-based approaches can help refugees, in a sense that I personally wanted to be a part of a group and not to be a part of something in a top-down manner. I mean, I wanted to be part of decision making. I wanted to be a part of policy. I wanted to be a part of approaches, and I didn't want to be put in a box or to be a stereotype. And I experienced it in gay community, in LGBT community in Australia, and it's very hard to tell people that, hello, I am different. Try to be more open-minded. Maybe I'm not your stereotype. Maybe I'm different. And I think that for anybody who wants to help refugees, there should be a group of refugees who can be a part of those decision making and policy making. That's what I think. And that really helps me, because when I connected to different organizations who wanted to include me in their, decisions, I felt stronger.
Thank you very much, Bijan, for sharing your story. And this is an incredible story that you got. Okay, we're going to move now to Grace as our last speaker. And Grace is going to share her point of view from starts. Thank you, Grace.
Thank you very much, Bram. And really, thank you so much, Jaya. And Bijan, thank you. It's really such an incredible honor to work alongside you. And I wanted to pick up from where Bijan ended, which is talking about really what it means to do strengths-based work. Because of course, as Jaya has pointed out so very, very, very clearly, there's an incredible amount of multiple oppressions that this particular group of people face in all sorts of ways and in all sorts of places. But they also come from incredible strength and resilience, personally, in community, in all sorts of ways. And so in the work that we do, we always make sure that we have a steering committee, which is people with lived expertise, that we do training, that we do all the work that we do, always in absolute partnership with people who come from refugee or asylum seeker backgrounds. And it's really, I think, significant to be able to sit in that place of genuine acknowledgement of expertise, and also genuine acknowledgement of power differentials and what that means, and the actual process of facilitating people's control over their journeys, however that journey has happened and wherever it's ended up. Because, of course, one of the things that we know is that coming from a home country to Australia, it's especially difficult and dangerous for people who have LGBTQIA+ identities or experiences. For example, if you were a trans man in a refugee camp, where's a safe bathroom? How are you going to get access to hormones or menstrual pads? Or just really practical things, but also, as Jaya pointed out so clearly, and Bijan as well, the level of hate and the level of vulnerability can be immense. So people have to tolerate, for want of a better word, an incredibly high level of abuse at the same time as maintaining incredible resilience. Other big issue that happens for people is that they are often forced into kind of Western notions of, you know, what on earth sexual orientation or how a gender identity might be, you know, some sort of idea about this is what gay looks like, or this is, you know, how you're supposed to be. And this boxing can mean that people are very, very alienated from either services, from getting whatever, you know, support they need. They're not actually, you know, that people don't see them. Heteronormativity, cisnormativity, people maybe don't read in the way that, you know, Anglo-Australians imagine that they ought to read. And so this puts people at incredible risk, not only of not getting services that they need, but of not being seen at all in any kind of way. And so we think we talk a lot about language in the work that we do. You know, are we talking about ourselves as LGBTQIA+ people? Does that have meaning even? And all that stuff, and how that leads to some of the really very high risk factors for people around mental health, around physical health, around living with danger. And so that we have some solid kind of strategies, which we will talk about maybe a bit more in later webinars, but just some thinking about, if you're in this space, just thinking about how you do inclusion. What does it mean? You know, if you're collecting data, are you putting someone at risk? In that beautiful introduction, Bram, you know, if you're asking questions, what happens to those questions? How are you looking after anonymity and confidentiality? How are you actually genuinely involving people? How is it peer-led and not led by some nice white lady? How do you actually really engage in a way that is decolonizing? And we, as I say in later webinars, we'll talk very practically about how our service does it and what works maybe and what doesn't work and the challenges and how we could do it better. But I do just want to say that there are 4 really solid decolonizing strategies that we use. And the first one is that you need structural support that is adaptable. The second one is you have to sit in the hall of mirrors. You need to be reflexive and self-reflexive about the work you're doing. You need to own, you need to be able to go, you know, I brought all this stuff with me and that was wrong. Bijan said to me before we began this webinar, you can't possibly do this work and imagine that you know what it's like if you haven't had that experience. And I really, really want to honour that. And once again, I want to come back to power, actually being able to own the power of the language that is, you know, your first language, your privilege, the intersectionality of people's experiences. You know, nobody is one thing. You know, a gay man from Iran has such a different experience to a trans woman from Tonga. They're just not the same, you know. And also sitting in the space of humility, stepping back. The end goal, and I profoundly believe this, the end goal of the work that I do is to not be needed, to not be actually here in this chair anymore. So, no, I don't know. That's, there's, you know, if we, in terms of practical strategies, we could talk about that later. But I really just want to thank you, Bishan, for being here, and you for having us.
Thank you very much, Grace, for that. And yes, so I hope we can have a discussion now. We still have about 20 minutes time. There is one question I would like to ask Jaya. We're talking about you know, all these countries where being gay, lesbian, and transgender, and the rest could mean death penalty, as Bijan said. Is Australia taking refugees from these countries? What's your observation of what's happening there?
Australia does take in refugees from these countries where they are persecuted. I think the problem that arises often is that they have to make a claim, a refugee status claim. And often that's the hard part. You know, sometimes they have to leave their country, like Bijan, he had to leave Iran. You know, they have to be in another transient country where they can actually make a claim for asylum, either through the UNHCR or the IOM. And often that's the challenge in some countries. You know, how do we do that? How do we try and claim asylum if in a country where it's really hard to do that? So that's where the challenge is. But once you make a claim, then Australia does accept, but we do know that the claims are far more than the people who are resettled. And often that is another very real dilemma that refugees face, and especially refugees from certain minority groups face.
Yep. Thank you, Jaya. And actually that follows. So I would like to ask you, Bijan, about your experience when you applied for your refugee status. Did you have to prove to the Australian government that you are gay?
Yes, actually. So I did it through a lawyer, and he told me that it was better for me to include some intimate photos. And he said that no matter what I did in Australia, the government would like to look at my life before coming to Australia, more than the thing that I was doing after coming to Australia. And so I had to write about it, about my life story. And then the case officer for my case, we had 1 hour interview about my case.
Okay. And how did you find that that process? I'm sorry. I hope you wouldn't mind sharing how you felt about that, and how did you convince them? Because I can imagine providing intimate photos from your life in Iran, you know, could put you in a really big danger back home. So how did you manage that, and how did you feel about that process?
It was a very stressful process, and I cannot even put it into words, especially in that 1 hour interview. So you have 1 hour to defend your life. And so I wrote my case, I presented it, and the case officer read it before the interview. For the interview, they asked me about an interpreter, and I didn't feel comfortable about it. And I told my case officer that, no, I don't want it. Because, to tell you the truth and to be totally honest, he was a middle-aged guy from my country. And I was thinking that, how can I trust a person that I just met to defend my life? And I said that, no, I would speak in English. And the case officer, he wanted to make sure that if I was all right. And I said, yes, I prefer it that way. but he actually suggested that the interpreter would be in the same room as me and the lawyer. So I had to talk about my private life in front of 3 people. And again, you know, the resilience that I got because of my past experiences in Iran. And I was talking to myself, okay, you just have this 1 hour. There is no time to be ashamed of anything. And I did it. I had a breakdown in the middle of it. And the case officer, he offered me a glass of water. And after I calmed down, I continued. But it was really hard because you need to prove something that is very hard to prove. And then there are questions, and some of the questions that you haven't thought about. And then you just need to provide an answer right there and then. Yes, so yeah, it was very hard. But also, you know, I had that privilege to come to Australia as a student and then applying for refugee. Most of my friends, they couldn't. They are still waiting in Turkey to get accepted by any country to go to. Some went to Greece and Spain at the moment, and I'm talking to them, and they have been in this process for 4 years, 5 years, 5 years, even more than that. So again, I had that privilege, but still, it's a very stressful, and I cannot emphasize that.
Thank you so much, Bijan, for sharing that. I'm sorry if it brings back, you know, like your really, really tough experiences. We have a question from the audience, from the participant for you, Bijan. Did you get the sense that your case interviewer, the person who interviewed you, had any knowledge or proficiency around LGBTIQA issues at all?
Yes, actually. He gave me that feeling that it was all right. And that was the thing that I needed at that time. It was, he didn't talk through an ignorant point of view. He talked to me in a way that he knew, he read my case, and I found him a knowledgeable person, I can say that. And it really helped in my case.
Okay.
But I can't imagine if somebody cannot speak in English first. So you need to trust the interpreter that you don't know. Second, if your case officer is not that good, then what can you do? You cannot do anything. You don't have any power at that stage.
Yeah. And you don't, yeah, and you know, coming away from your country, and you know, it's very difficult for you to be out in your country to begin with. Obviously, you're lacking social support, and you know, in Australia, in the process of applying for that, apart from your lawyer, obviously, yeah. So that makes it much more difficult. There's another question for you, but before we go there, I would like to ask a question to Grace. Grace, you mentioned about this sort of humility, you know, like never to assume that you could ever imagine, even understanding what, you know, what these refugees are coming from, you know, and their experiences. Just a question: how did you get to that stage where you can accept that you will never truly know about what they're going through?
Oh, that is a very hard question, and I don't, honestly, truthfully, I don't know that I know the answer. I mean, I think, you know, you're made up of a whole bunch of experiences yourself. You live in a cross-cultural way. You listen to people, pay attention. You start to be able to I mean, I really don't know the answer. You start to be able to know that the things you know are the things that you know. And I sound a little bit like Dick Cheney, but there is something in the acknowledgement, this straight up sitting in the place of going, I know what I know, and I'm here with you. And then it's not my job or my responsibility to do anything except leverage my privilege in the very, very best way that I can, and sometimes well, and sometimes badly. And I know that doesn't really answer your question, but I'm going to go away and think about a better answer for that. I don't know. You know, I mean, you live in the world. You know, sometimes you're smart about stuff, and sometimes you just have to go. I can only begin to imagine.
Yeah. Thank you.
I did want to say one other thing, which is that people who have diverse sexual orientations and gender identities are among the highest rates of refusal for getting accepted into this country. And because, as Bijan says, it's very hard to prove, and as you very pointed out, so it's a very, very high rate of refusal, which is, I think, an important thing to know, because you're putting people straight back into danger.
Yeah. And that's actually a very nice segue into a question from one of the participants here, for Bijan. From your personal experiences, what would you feel could vastly improve and avoid re-traumatization for individuals when going through that Australian visa protection visa application process?
It's very complicated, because you need a sense of belonging. I can tell from my own experience, you need to have a sense of belonging to this country in order to survive this. And this sense of belonging can happen through a group of people that are in the same situation, or your connections to the community. As I said it before, creating your own chosen family. Because sometimes, I can give you an example and can show you. Like, for example, in Iran, whenever I saw police, I always had that, very fast heartbeat, and I was quite nervous. And here in Australia, when I came to Australia, whenever I saw police here, I had that same, feeling. And one of my friends, she talked to me and she said that, Bijan, I know this happened to you, but police here is different. They don't want to arrest you for your homosexuality. So that, that talk with my friend helped me in that situation. But that friend, I created that friendship, we created that friendship, and that's one of the way. Another one is to get support, but again, not in a, what is the word for it? Not in a top-down manner, like from a savior or from somebody who wants to save you. For me personally, it doesn't work that way. It's like, I want to work with somebody and get the support rather than to be in that situation.
Okay. Thank you, Bijan. Just picking up on one of the things that you said at the end of your presentation, Bijan, this is a question for you, Jaya. What do you think, and I know you have lots and lots of advocacy works about refugees in Australia, and as Bijan said, it's kind of like the principle of nothing about us without us kind of, principle. So how do you think health professionals and also case workers could support and could involve refugees in pleading their cases or in advocating for their needs, so that the policies could be directly informed by the refugees themselves?
Um, I feel that the Refugee Council of Australia and the Refugee Advocacy Network and the asylum seeker groups in various states have strong refugee and asylum seeker voice where possible. You know? So they do have the advocates and possible people like me in our community and academic hat. And then we have the actual people who have had the lived experience, like Bijan, you know. And I think often I would say, you see, I would say, Bijan, that it's important that some people like to engage and some people don't. You know, they are now part of the community. They just want to get on with their lives. You know, they don't want to now be involved in some ways with what happened because they feel they have gone through this process. But there are others who want to be involved, who want to be activists, who want to have a voice. And then once you know that you feel that you want to be part of that, then there are different various avenues. You know? So as I've mentioned, the Refugee Council is one of them, the asylum seeker support networks in every state, and the group like in Western Australia, it's called ASSET, but the organizations for torture and trauma also involve people who have had the lived experience. You know, so I think the being part of the process is a very personal choice and a personal experience that cannot be forced on people, but we can always, those who are willing to do it, they should be allowed to do it. I think it's the rights-based participatory perspective. You know, it also works on people's strengths, and it actually helps to understand the diversity that we have as wonderful human beings from different parts of the world. You know?
Thank you, Jaya, for that. Now we have one more question, and Linda, this one is actually for you, Linda. And I also noticed that Sabrin is here as well. So perhaps Linda or Sabrin could answer this question. I was wondering what kind of support services are provided to support individuals in their pre-flight, flight, and post-flight experiences through CDNI. Would you mind giving us an answer to that, please?
Yeah, sure, Sabrina, I'll take that one. So that's a very good question. CDNI, we are in our early days of building capacity to support LGBTQIA plus refugees. Our goal and aim and objectives is to connect LGBTQI plus refugees not only with each other, the sense of promoting and building connection, sharing experiences and support to ensure that they know and feel that they are not alone in the community. I think what Bijan was saying before about a sense of belonging and connection is very important. So we'll focus on that particular aspect, connecting people. Secondly, we do have connections to professional health services and programs that we're building progressively, like STARTS, and we are able to put people in touch with the right health professionals and other professionals that can give that support. So that's the short answer for now. Sabrina, did you want to add to that at all?
You can hear me, right?
Yes, Sabrina, we can hear you.
Yeah, that's very good answer, Linda. So that's what we can do from CDNI. Basically, our target, this is one of our main aims in CDNI, to support this LGBTQI people, LGBTQI refugees. So yeah, we are trying to connect these people to all to the people who can give the mental health support, and yeah, all the the medical professionals. That's our aim in future. And we are in the process of working on it. So down the track, we are very much hopeful that we can accomplish this target, because this is something I think we are ignoring, as in all over Australia. We don't talk much about this issue, and this is a big gap here. So we are very much passionate from CDNI to work on it. Yeah, so we are in the process of developing various strategies to work on this area.
Okay. Thank you, Sabrine. And I'm very sorry, there are a couple of other questions, but we ran out of time. And one of the questions actually is more about post-resettlement. So perhaps we could save that question for our next webinar. I would like to thank all the panelists, Jaya, Bijan, and Grace, for their time and their sharing and their insights tonight. And also Linda for looking after the technical sides of this webinar. I hope this webinar has been useful and beneficial for all of you participants. And I hope to to see you again in our next series. Keep an eye on announcements from us. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon or good evening.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye, Bijan. Bye. Thank you, Bram. Bye, Grace.
Thank you, Bram.
Okay, Linda, perhaps you can stop the recording and just have a quick debrief, perhaps?